The referee was standing over the ball. The players were ready. The stadium was ready. Millions of people around the world were ready. And yet the match did not restart. Not because of an injury. Not because of a security problem. Not because of bad weather. The game stopped because television commercials were still running. That sounds ridiculous. It sounds like something football fans would joke about online. Except it actually happened. And once you understand why it happened, you start to see a much bigger problem hiding underneath the 2026 World Cup. Because FIFA has introduced a new rule that many people believe changes the sport itself, not the tactics, not the players, not the format, the actual rhythm of football. And the deeper you look into it, the harder it becomes to believe that this was ever about player welfare. It starts with something FIFA calls the hydration break. Now, on the surface, that sounds completely reasonable. Football matches can be played in extreme temperatures. Players run for 90 minutes. Heat exhaustion is real. Dehydration is real. Nobody argues against protecting athletes. That's exactly why the rule sounds so harmless, because the name does most of the work. Hydration break, player safety, player welfare. Simple. Except the actual implementation tells a very different story. Under the new system, matches receive mandatory stoppages around the 22nd minute of each half. Not optional, not based on conditions. Mandatory, across the entire tournament, every match, every stadium, every environment. And that is where things start getting strange. Because if this is truly a health policy, then why is it being enforced even when there is no heat problem to solve? Take one of the tournament's opening matches, Mexico against South Africa. The game was played at the Estadio Azteca, one of the most famous football stadiums on earth. The temperature was around 23 degrees Celsius. A comfortable evening, not scorching, not dangerous, not remotely close to the conditions normally associated with emergency cooling measures. Yet the referee stopped the match anyway, exactly as required. The game paused. The clock kept moving, and viewers at home were served commercials. 23 degrees, no heat emergency, no crisis, no obvious reason for a mandatory hydration stoppage, unless the stoppage was never primarily about hydration. And suddenly the question becomes unavoidable. Who actually benefits from this? Because fans didn't ask for it. Players weren't demanding a fixed interruption every half. Managers weren't campaigning for a scheduled timeout. So where did it come from? The answer appears when you follow the money. Back in March, FIFA announced that broadcasters would be allowed to sell advertising during these breaks. And that changes everything, because now the hydration break is not just a sporting rule, it is a commercial asset, a brand new block of premium advertising inventory inserted directly into the middle of live World Cup matches. Think about that for a moment. Football has always been valuable because it is continuous. The action rarely stops. Fans stay locked in. Advertisers struggle to find natural places to interrupt the experience. But suddenly, FIFA creates guaranteed stoppages, predictable stoppages, scheduled stoppages, stoppages that can be sold. And once those stoppages become valuable, a new problem emerges. The incentives change. The break is no longer simply a pause, it becomes a product, and products are expected to generate revenue, which brings us back to that bizarre moment where players were standing around waiting, because some broadcasters decided to maximize every second of those commercial windows. Fox Sports became one of the most talked about examples. Instead of keeping viewers connected to the stadium atmosphere, they reportedly used the breaks for full commercial blocks. Not highlights, not tactical analysis, not live shots from the pitch, advertisements. And that's where the situation crossed a line for many fans. Because the interruptions didn't just feel annoying, they started affecting the viewing experience itself. At one point, broadcasters were expected to return before play resumed. Simple, get back to the action, show the match. But there were complaints that viewers actually missed live football because commercial breaks ran too long. Think about how unbelievable that sounds. The World Cup, the biggest tournament in the sport, and people at home potentially missing active gameplay because advertisers had not finished speaking. For critics, that wasn't just a broadcasting mistake. It was evidence of a system becoming distorted, a system where football was no longer the priority. And then came an even bigger concern, because the consequences weren't limited to television audiences. They started appearing on the pitch itself. One example that generated discussion involved Brazil and Morocco. Morocco had momentum. They were leading. The energy energy was with them, the pressure was building. Everything in football tells you that momentum matters. Players feel it, managers feel it, fans definitely feel it. Then the mandatory break arrived, play stopped, everyone reset, coaches gathered players, instructions were delivered, momentum cooled, and when the match resumed, the dynamics looked different. Brazil eventually found a way back. Now, nobody can prove a direct cause and effect relationship. Football is more complicated than that, but that's not really the point. The point is that FIFA introduced an artificial interruption into a sport built around continuous flow, and whenever you interrupt flow, you alter the conditions of competition, even if only slightly, even if unintentionally, or perhaps not unintentionally at all, because another contradiction was quietly developing elsewhere. At the exact same tournament, FIFA was aggressively targeting time wasting. Throw-ins were being monitored, goal kicks were being monitored, substitutions were being monitored, referees were being encouraged to crack down on delays. Every second mattered. The message was clear: keep the game moving, protect the flow, reduce unnecessary stoppages. Sounds reasonable. Until you remember that the same organization had just inserted a mandatory 3-minute interruption into every half, and suddenly the contradiction becomes impossible to ignore. Players are punished for wasting seconds, but everyone is required to stop for minutes. Managers are discouraged from creating unofficial tactical timeouts, but now they are being handed official ones. Goalkeepers cannot manipulate the clock, but broadcasters can effectively benefit from extended interruptions. The logic starts collapsing under its own weight, and coaches noticed. Some were seen using the breaks for tactical discussions. Others openly acknowledged the advantage. Why wouldn't they? The opportunity exists. A guaranteed moment to regroup, a guaranteed moment to reorganize, a guaranteed moment to change the match. In trying to eliminate certain forms of interruption, FIFA may have created the largest interruption modern football has ever seen, and that's where the criticism became something bigger than a single rule, because many observers started viewing this as part of a wider trend, a trend where commercial priorities slowly move closer and closer to the center of the sport, not around the edges, not during halftime, not before kickoff, right in the middle of the action. The concern isn't really about 3 minutes. 3 minutes alone isn't the issue. The concern is what those 3 minutes represent, because once football accepts interruptions for commercial reasons, where does that process stop? 1 break, 2 breaks, longer breaks, more advertising, different forms of integration. The rule creates a precedent, and precedents have a way of expanding. That is why this debate refuses to disappear. Supporters of the policy make an important argument. They point out that some World Cup matches will be played in genuinely dangerous heat. They're right. In those situations, cooling measures are essential. Nobody wants players risking serious health problems. That concern is legitimate, but critics respond with a simple question. If the goal is truly player protection, then why not use the previous model? Why not allow referees to make decisions based on actual conditions? Why mandate identical stoppages in comfortable temperatures? Why enforce them inside climate-controlled environments? Why apply them when there is no obvious physiological need? Those questions remain unanswered. And every unanswered question fuels suspicion, because the rule starts looking less like a health policy and more like a revenue policy, a commercial policy wearing the language of player welfare, a billing strategy disguised as protection. And that perception may be the most damaging consequence of all: trust. Trust is what allows fans to accept controversial decisions. Trust is what allows governing bodies to introduce changes. Trust is what keeps people believing that the competition comes first. But every time a match stops for reasons that feel disconnected from football itself, that trust weakens a little more. And that's the real danger here. Not a single hydration break, not one commercial, not even one delayed restart. The danger is the growing belief that football is no longer being shaped primarily by the needs of the sport, but by the needs of the business surrounding it. Because once fans start believing that matches are being organized around advertising schedules rather than football schedules, every future decision gets viewed through that lens. Every new rule, every new format, every new change, and suddenly the question hanging over the entire tournament becomes impossible to avoid. Did FIFA introduce a health measure that happens to create advertising opportunities? Or did it create advertising opportunities and then package them as a health measure? The answer to that question may determine how people remember this World Cup, because for many fans, the most controversial part isn't the break itself, it's what the break appears to reveal. And if they're right, then this isn't just a new rule, it's a glimpse into what football could become next.